actually reflect that relationship, inter-ethnic relationship that have been existing, the superb technology that have been existing in making the, and then they have also been able to tell us about the technological advancement of the African people. And so the willingness also coming, willingness to release them. Then unlawfulness is also another issue that really coming. But we will not actually delay ourselves on that. But certainly what it becomes important for me is the implication of this meaning, of the meaning of restitution and return. The first one is just like I said, the question of ownership, you know, is a factor which determines the repatriation of cultural objects to their places of origin. In restitution, no question of ownership is needed to be debated at all. Once you can establish that these cultural objects were taken at the instance of warfare, like it was argued in the case of a Benin cultural object that were returned, there is no need of saying, okay, you want to prove. Yeah, you have a United Nations Convention that actually suggested that, you know, so there is no need for proving, for further proving. So then the second one is that a cultural object proved to have been stolen, confiscated during the war, must be repatriated to their places of origin. Once you have established that this is where they are taken. So that is the leg of argument which the Benin Palace is holding on. When there was a crisis between the Edo State government, the federal government, and Benin Palace, that Benin Palace believes that, yeah, they own this cultural object. Yes, culturally they own it, because Nigeria was not Nigeria then. It was 1897, not after 1914. So the federal government does not have the right, even based on the convention, the federal government does not have the right to lay claim to that. Even Edo State government does not have the right to lay claim to that, simply because of the fact that Edo State is not only owned by the Edo people. There are other cultural entities that own Edo State. And the palace belongs to the Edo people. So ordinarily, those repatriated cultural objects, they're supposed to be domiciled in the palace of Edo, of Benin. So, and that is not debatable, except if you want to actually play foul of the system. That is when, yes, as a Federal Republic of Nigeria, as a result of that Edo State is an entity under the federal government of Nigeria, the federal government may go into agreement, negotiation with the Edo government. So yes, you don't have the capacity. Probably if Edo State does not have the capacity to maintain it. Because to maintain this cultural object, to be able to manufacture resources for you, to be able to be useful, you know, optimally, it requires a lot of fund, a lot of infrastructure, which a state may not have the capacity to hold, which a state may not, except you are just like River State or Lagos State. So because it requires building a very state-of-art museum that will have to keep them. The security has to be beefed up. Electricity must not fail. Yeah, electricity must not fail. So these are the issues. So if the federal government feels that Edo State does not have that capacity and they want to do justice to this, they can go, federal government can go into negotiation with the palace. So again, yeah, we also have the problem of, you know, the technical use of this term as actually confided in law, you know. So when you now look at all this, for instance, there's also a question of a crisis that actually also erupted, especially in determining if a cultural object should be restituted or returned. You know, because a large number of cultural objects were also captured in the war. But it is not at the time of war that they were taken away. They were still here for some times, and then they were sold or they were trafficked and then taken them away. So, but again, we have an example of that when France refused a Nigerian claim of, you know, certain knock objects. You know, knock objects were found in central Nigeria, around Niger State and the rest. So there are objects, you know, that were taken away from that. And Nigeria wanted to claim this from France. And so they've done a lot of persuasion, a lot of lobbying, which failed. And then they had to go to court in France. So they now went to French court. And then the French court now refused the application of Nigeria. That yes, the knock culture, there was no war that was caused on the knock. that will now make Nigeria to now be pleading for restitution. So it is return that Nigeria needed, not restitution. So however, when you look at all these implications now, you now begin to talk about how the legal frame, international legal framework become confusing. One of the reasons that they become confusing and unhelpful is that, yes, in most of these conventions and norms that guide repatriations of a cultural object, Nigeria is not an active player. Yeah, not an active player because probably as at the time they were making this law, Nigeria was not there. Of course, there was 1956 Convention of UNESCO, UNIDROIT 1970. In 1950, Nigeria was not Nigeria. There was no Nigeria. There was no independent Nigeria. Nigeria was not a sovereign state then. And so it could not participate in this convention. And so all what that were done at that convention, they did not take care of Nigerian interests because Nigeria was not a party to it. And so once you are not a party to it, the provision of this convention, you cannot apply them. Then again, even when we have the opportunity of ratifying those conventions, when we became a state, or when those states are made, when those conventions are made, they needed to be domesticated in the country. So the process of domestication becomes problematic. And again, our own legal framework, the local legal framework, okay, look at the National Commission for Museums and Monuments Act, 1979. Yeah, there is one issue there that becomes very worrisome to me, as we shall see later. That yes, in the case of trafficking, if the trafficker is arrested, then you find him guilty, and then you convict him with a payment of 5,000 naira or alternative of a 3-month imprisonment. Somebody has stolen object that worth several millions of naira, and you now convict him, and then you ask him to go to prison for 3 months or pay 5,000 naira. And that section is still there till today, not yet amended. So these are problems, but we are going to look at that later. And so, yeah, that now leads us to how, like I said earlier on, how cultural objects were looted from Nigeria. And like I said, this began, as far back as 1897, and they still continue up to today. So at first, we have, factors that led to, looting of Nigerian cultural objects. The first one is a deliberate warfare, like example of a Benin War that we cited, and then the Biafran War that we cited. In the Benin War was intentionally caused on the palace to loot a cultural object in the palace, because apart from the casualties that were recorded, who repelled them. Of course, yeah, that Benin War, they made 2 attempts before they could enter the palace. The first one, they were repelled. The second one, they now prepared very well, and then they repelled, apart from that casualty, and the Oba that was taken away and then sent to exile. There was no other thing that was touched, rather than all those cultural objects are taken away, and then they've set fire on the palace. So which means it's a deliberate war, which was caused on the Benin Palace, simply because they know that the palace contained large number of treasures of cultural objects. Then again, the Oran museums, yeah, between 1967 to 1970, Oran Museum was, invaded. Yeah, if you can use the word of a Putin, invaded. Oran Museum was invaded. And more than 800 cultural objects were taken away from Oran Museum. And all of these, they find themselves in, in Europe and America. Then we also have an example of accidental digging and unscientific excavation of grave goods. For instance, yeah, in 1938, somebody was actually laying foundation of his house very close to the palace of Oni of Ife. And the process, they now saw, Ife bronze, when they were digging the foundation. And so that suggested that, yeah, there were deposits of, treasures on that land. Then another one really occurred in 1985 when in a farmer in Kawu area, that's a 50-kilometer northeast of Abuja, was actually digging. And then he found, some cultural objects which were identified as a knock hearts. And so subsequently, there was an invasion of that area to continue to dig. And so most of these cultural objects that were removed from the soil, they are no longer in Nigeria. They find their way out of the country. Then again, we have a vandalism and a museum theft. Intentionally vandalization of the museums and intentionally burgling of the museums. where they have to cut away, several cultural objects like the Igboku. Yeah, one of such example was the one between 1995 to 1999, which was very, very, high. The prevalence was very high. And that was also when my own department, the University of Ibadan, Department of Archeology and Anthropology, the museum in that department was looted. And that is when Igboku, terracotta Igboku pot was taken away from Nigeria. Then a lot of other museum thefts were. Lales Lawyer Museum was boggled. Several other museums were boggled. Even the Isia Museum was boggled, and several cultural objects were taken away from them. Then we also have unauthorized scientific digging. Yeah, this also started as far back as 1910 when Leo Frobinus, went to Ife, and he hung on the fact that he got a license from a British colonial authority to come and conduct archaeological investigation in that area. And so he got a lot of cultural objects from the unauthorized scientific research, which he took away to Germany. And so they use that object now to establish museums and Institute of African Studies at the University of Frankfurt, Frobinus Institute of African Studies. So, and recently too, in 2015, there is an European Africanist. Of course, he's my friend. I don't want to mention his name because it's not well proved. Yeah, he came to Nigeria to conduct archaeological investigation in the Nok area. And so after the archaeological investigation, all the artifact in quote now, that he got there, he packed them, shipped them to Germany. And just luckily, the president of Archaeology Association of Nigeria, that's Professor Gundu, now brought it up. So it was a bigger issue between Nigeria and Germany. Of course, I was consulted by German embassy, in Nigeria to give them the accurate information about what really happened. And I gave my own report, but then I don't know if those materials were returned or not. But what we saw later was, okay, maybe about 3 or 4 months thereafter, there was an exhibition of Nigerian artifacts which were collected from Nok. So which means we cannot actually close the chapter of say, okay, maybe this thing is still not continuing. It's still continuing. So then we also have unholy donation. Yeah, unholy donation, I call this unholy donation that because people, the traffickers will go to people that owns a cultural artifact and say, yes, this is not godly, it's devilish. Then you have, of course, Lofrubrinus also did that. Yeah, that he will convince people that the artifact they keep at home is ungodly. And so if they want to go to paradise, they have to burn, throw them away. And once they are thrown away, I remember also in my hometown, there was a Ibeji, Ibeji cultural object that symbolized the spirit of Ibeji that was taken away from the palace. And then we got to know that one Ajala came, that Islamic clerics, he came and preached that those objects were not of good formations to having good faith in God, that they are ungodly. And so people now they release it to them and then they took them away. We never knew where they were packed. He did not burn it in our presence. He did not put it in the river in our presence. He took them away. And so these are the unholy donations. So which means people voluntarily give this. But I call it unholy donation simply because you coerce them. It's by coercion. So they have to be returned. Because that is one of the problems with the return. If object is willingly given to those who owns it now, then you may lack evidence of proof that you want them to be back. And unless, like Macron, the president of France, unless like Macron own up, people like Macron, they own up that yes, this object must be returned. So if they don't own up that the object must be returned, you don't have legal backing to prove them that it's yours because they have been voluntarily, because to them, they have been voluntarily given out. They are not object of trafficking. They are not object of war pillage. So the owner willingly give it to you. And so whatever is given to you belongs to you. So these are the issues. So then we also have a corruptive purchases. People will go home. They will go to the homes of those people that have cultural objects in their homes, and then they will purchase them at a ridiculous amount, simply because people that are selling them, they are ignorant of what they are, and they are ignorant of the global market value. Then we also have a trafficking. Trafficking is a continuous process. It's still going on. people taking, of course, most of this trafficking are also, done by the native people. Probably you just go to your home and you see cultural objects owned by your parents, especially most people that are engaged in traditional religion. So maybe they will see. Of course, we have a case of somebody who had taken Okmanfa of his father's Okmanfa. That is a definer trade, definition trade. He took it away and went to sell it. So he went to sell it because he has converted to Christianity. So he has to. So if you have converted to Christianity and you don't need it again, why can't you burn it? Why do you have to go and sell it and collect money? So these are the processes. Of course, what are the factors that influence looting? The first one is ignorance about the importance of cultural objects in Nigeria. We lack that knowledge about cultural objects. We lack it. We lack the knowledge. So many people look at it and say, okay, these are just for aesthetics. Yeah, or probably it's just those that made it, they had, they are not busy. Of course, like in those days, you have to see the carvers. They are usually people that do not have strong ability to go to farm. So they see them as a lazy people. And so their products are even product of laziness. So people don't want to interact with them. So they lack that fundamental knowledge. Then the second one is a poverty. Simply because of the people, simply because of the fact that, we have, very huge amount of people that are, that could not actually afford, their daily livelihood. And so they will sell something. Then we also have a pervasive culture of corruption, that makes a museum officials to even take away, the cultural object in the museum and sell it. We have cases like that. Then absence of effective law that can protect looting is also another factor. Of course, we are not saying that Nigeria does not have a law. We have a Decree 9 of 1974. We also have a Decree 77 of 1979. Then we have a National Commission for Museums and Monuments Act 1979 that were made to secure them. But they are ineffective. They are ineffective. All of them are ineffective. They are not updated. They are not updated. They don't meet with the current time. And so that is why Professor Shilo in 1999 observed that sanctions and protective measures enshrined in those legal instruments are hopelessly inadequate. And I cited an example of a punishment against the trafficker that are enshrined in the National Commission for Museums and Monuments. That yes, a fine of 5,000 naira or alternative of going to prison for 3 months. When you are convicted of a trafficking of cultural objects. So which of the two is not easy for me to do? Like yes, I've taken a cultural object and I've sold them for maybe about 200 million naira. And so you now sentence me to 3 years, 3 months imprisonment. I will gladly go and come back and be enjoying my money. Yeah, of course. Or pay the option of fine of 5,000 naira and off hook. So then again, we also have a low level of security arrangement in our museums and institutions that keep cultural property. At that point in time, they also look for a retired person who has been very old to now be the security in the museum. Yeah. And so only shouting at that person, the person will run away and no protective again. So again, the customs and excise it has a very weak organization at that point in time. I don't know what is on ground now, but at that point in time, when the looting was very high, then the customs also colluded at that point in time. Then again, security information is not, and then Nigerian relationship with Interpol to retrieve, before they get to their destination, before the cultural property get to their destination, it's also very weak, And so that actually made a number of museums, to be raided, and then they are looted. Then lastly is the growing enthusiasm about African cultural objects, in which Nigeria is the prime. Yeah, Nigeria happens to be the prime of the African cultural objects, producers. So, and that actually led to, building, European collaborators who will come to collaborate with local traffickers here. They will instigate the local trafficker to go and steal the cultural object, and then they will sell it to them and take away. So simply because they are treasured more over there than here. So there is this enthusiasm that actually they wanted to know what is behind the memory of these people, that could actually make them to make all this kind of thing. Recently, I got an invitation from Illinois Museum, that I should actually do a kind of summary, summary inscriptions on some of their objects that were, they send the pictures to me, and I begin to look at that. These are part of the objects that were taken. Of course, ridiculously too, there was a time I was in the University of, Cologne in Germany, and I visited the museum, and there I saw, that is where I saw the Ere Ibeji. And by the time they now catalog it, they put the descriptions on it, they call it Ere Ibaji. Ere Ibaji, and I called the curator, come, this is not Ere Ibeji. They heard Ere Ibaji from Iloba. So I said, no, this is not Ere Ibaji, it's Ere Ibeji from Ilobu, and I'm from Ilobu. And I took out my passport to show him that I'm from Ilobu. She was very surprised. And then she invited me for a talk. So these are part of the things. Of course, the representation of these images cannot be, established there. They cannot. A lot of misrepresentations are carried out up there. So yet there is this growing emphasis on it. And so we have to look at the magnitude of the looted object. For instance, in 1897 alone, about 4,000 objects were taken away from the palace of Benin. 4,000. 4,000. Let's just assume that, okay, we pack 4,000 cultural objects in this room. This room cannot take them. So you can now imagine the huge. And so since that 1897, the trend continues. So we don't even have the record of how many of these cultural objects that were taken away. But certainly we know from some museums, like for instance in Britain, you have a museum that has about 700 images. 700 images. We have in Oxford, a museum that has 327 images. In Berlin Museum has 580 images. So on and on like that. Then Hamburg has 186 images, cultural objects that were taken away from Nigeria that are still presently there, not as at 2021. We are mentioned as at 2021, they are still presently there. I cannot say, probably those that were returned recently in late 2021, maybe some of them might have been taken back. But as much as that are still there, then in Dresden also in Germany, you have a 182. Then in Vienna, Austria, we have a 167 cultural objects. So you can see the table, Then in USA, we have in New York City Museum, we have a 163 cultural objects that were there belonging to Nigeria. Of course, those ones, I'm sure they are still there, because the US has not returned anything. So then we also have in Philadelphia, we have a 100 as men. So these are data that were taken as far back as March 3rd, 2022, just about 5 days ago. These data were collected 5 days ago, and then they suggested that, yeah, these objects are there as at November 2021. So you can now begin to see the magnitude of this. And so it cannot be quantified in terms of naira. It cannot be quantified. They are so enormous. They are so enormous. So cultural objects are therefore, because of the enormosity of this cultural object, it's a very serious issue. Very serious issue. Simply because of the fact that we know what cultural objects signify. They are treasures. They are precious treasures, projecting the history and defining the people. Yes, it's our memory that we are putting back. It's a symbolization of our memory. It's a trajectory of our history, our encounter in the past, which now serves as a symbol between the old and the new. Yeah, and whoever does not actually take his past serious will never move forward. So when we now see most of these cultural objects, we say, yeah, these are my identity. These are my historical consciousness. These are my projective aspirations. And especially when you also look at the technology, used to make this object, you now see that look at Oriolokun. Oriolokun did not descend from heaven. Somebody sat down and carved it. And look at the sophistication, the intensity of the technology that is put in there, the hard work that is put in there, the motifs that is put in there, So it tells us about cultural development of a set of people. And so as a result of that, there is need to retrieve them. Of course, in another way around, it will be a symbol of unity for Nigeria. We have mentioned across the board in Nigeria where these cultural objects were taken.